Indian knowledge systems, Indian philosophy, Indian art, Indian dance, Indian mathematics are among the crucial foundations of our work. India was one of the places which asked the big questions of humanity. Why are we here? How do we live a moral life? How do we measure the world around us? What is the world around us? What is the relationship of this earth to the heavens, the stars, the planet? A few other countries also attempted to answer these questions. And while the answers which countries like Greece and China are very well known around the world, I think it's fair to say that the Indian answers had not had the global recognition that they deserve. On this book tour, I've already traveled around most of the university towns in Britain, been around Australia, and names like Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta, which should be common knowledge everywhere, are completely unknown in the West. The ideas of Greece, names like Pythagoras and Archimedes, are instantly known across America, across Europe, across most of the world. Even the story of Archimedes and his bath shouting Eureka is known by 6 and 7-year-olds globally. But when I was lecturing in Oxford or Cambridge, you can ask a room full of mathematics PhDs about Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta, and they would look completely blank. Why is that? Why is that the case? Because clearly in the 21st century, it should not be the case. Equally, the proposition that the numbers used around the world every day were invented in India is also something that meets with blank glances in most of the world. These numbers are known in the West as Arabic numbers, and most people, like kind of 95% of peoples, assume that they were invented by the Arabs. And when you go to a lecture hall in Oxford and Cambridge and propose that these numbers were invented here, you ask how many people know about Aryabhatta, Brahmagupta, and the whole world in mathematics. 5 Indian hands go up, and no one else. The reason for this presumably has its roots primarily in the story of colonialism and the way that Victorian Indology, particularly not the 18th century Indologists like William Jones or my forebear, my great-great-uncle, James Prinsep, who fought for this and fought for Sanskrit. But later generation like Macaulay, the bête noire of James Prinsep, underrated, devalue India's contribution. So that, after all, how could you claim to be bringing civilization to a country which had been exporting it 3,000 years? But I think it's not the entire answer. Because you only have to look at the way that China, in the last, recently, 40 years, has brought global recognition to the idea of the Silk Road. Now, this is an idea which many people today assume is a historically valid fact that has a concrete historical basis. In reality, not one single classical source in either China or the West refers to the Silk Road. The term was invented in 1877 by a German geographer called Baron von Richthofen. Those of you that know your First World War flying history will know the story of the Red Baron. That was his grandson. Von Richthofen came up with the idea of the Silk Road. It reaches the English language as late as 1934 with a guy called Sven Edin, who's an archaeologist, who writes a book called The Silk Road. And it's only in my team in the 1980s that these ideas are really becoming globally recognized, and you begin to get Silk Road cafes and so on springing up internationally. And yet this idea is now totally dominant. At the moment, this very moment in London, there are 2 exhibitions. The Silk Road show at the British Museum and the Silver Oasis exhibition at the British Library, both of which give versions of this map, which, as you can see, links the Mediterranean with Roman cities such as Palmyra and Antioch with the South China Sea, cities like Luoyang and Chang'an. But India, there's not even a port or a city mentioned in this map, which, as you can see, also has the maritime Silk Road, which passes by India without stopping at a single port. India is, in fact, only the Himalayas, according to this map. But Central Asia, Persia, Uzbekistan, China is the world where commerce takes place, where there are cities and bazaars, where all this takes place. But in reality, for the classical period, this map is effectively a lie. It communicates the historical untruths, because in reality, we're talking about the classical period. Look at the names of the map: Petra, Palmyra, Antioch. These are not medieval cities, these are classical cities in this map. And the reality is, as any historian will tell you, that China and Rome had no idea of each other's existence. China had a vague awareness of a place called Daquin, a legendary here be dragons place, a power beyond and beyond. Equally, Rome, in the late Roman period, there's awareness of a city called Thebes, which is far away and difficult to get to, where silk comes from. In contrast, Roman Egypt and India are in annual contact, with fleets of 250 and more vessels passing between the two. And India and China are each other's number one trading partners. So it's not just that explorers are occasionally reaching India, having sort of braved, unspeakable horrors on the way. This is a regular trading. This is happening every year, thanks to the monsoon wind. And it's not even a difficult trip to make. It's 2 months. You have to go with the winds. You have to learn to ride the winds. And with those winds, you leave in the spring and you arrive in the early summer. You've then got until late August, and then the winds reverse and you sail back. So if you sail with the winds, you can easily do a trip to Roman Egypt and to India and back every year. And as we'll see, this was an immensely profitable journey. This is the evidence that map is nonsense. This is a new map put out by the Oxford University Archaeological Department this year that have been studying Roman coin hoards for the last 2 decades. This is a map of every Roman coin hoard ever discovered. As you can see, and as you'd imagine, thick in Italy, Gaul, Spain, North Africa, the entire Mediterranean basin, falling off as you head up to Scandinavia, falling off as you head south into the Sahara. But with a trickle down the Nile, a little scattering in Yemen, a few in Afghanistan and Persia. Is there any Roman coin ever found in China? No, not one. But look at South India and look at Sicily. And also Sri Lanka. They're thick orange with Roman coin hoards, as has been known since the 18th century, when East India Company officials started finding golden ori south of Pondicherry, all over, huge quantities. So we need to reassess this period of history. This book contains very little that is brand new. I am merely compiling the brilliant scholarship of generations of historians, most of them Indian. But bizarrely, it is the first time, possibly since A.L. Basham's Wonder That Was India in 1954, that all this has been gathered into a single hardcover and brought together. And a huge amount has changed since Basham. An awful lot has changed even in the last 10 years, particularly thanks to the excavations in Roman Egypt and at this moment in Putnam in Waziris. And we have a radically different image of India's place in the world now, thanks to this scholarship, than the situation 10 years ago, never mind when Basham was writing. So I propose that there are three principal systems of Indian thought which diffused out and which changed the world. The first is Buddhism, which I propose again, and I know that maybe that there are those in this room that will disagree with this, but I would argue that Buddhism is the single biggest Indian soft power export of antiquity. That Buddhism traveled not just through Pakistan and Afghanistan to Bactria, not just through China to Mongolia, not just through China to Japan and Korea, not just to Laos and Cambodia and Thailand, but to Sri Lanka and to Burma, transformed the whole of Asia. But because there are very few Buddhists left in India, in a sense, this entire package of Indian thought has had very few champions, many great scholars, but in a sense, it doesn't have the championing of it, because behind the spread of Buddhist thought comes Sanskrit and Pali, comes a whole range of Indian ideas of geography, of Jambudvipa, of how to talk about time, about yugas. And this passes out the entire breadth of Asia, transforms Asia completely and irrevocably up to the present day. The second system of Indian thought, one more familiar to people in this room, is the whole spread of Sanskrit, Hindu kingship, and the whole world which emerged with what Sheldon Pollock has called the Sanskrit cosmopolis, the spread of language all the way from Kandahar to Bali, so that all over Southeast Asia you have orthographically perfect Sanskrit inscriptions in temple after temple, in town after town. The third system of thought I'm going to talk about is Indian mathematics, and the way that Indian ideas of zero, place value, and the entire Indian number system spreads quite late in the day to the Arab world through the Barmakids, who are Sanskrit literate Buddhists, embeds itself in the Arab and Islamic world through the translations of Al-Khwarizmi, and then finally, very late in the day, 600 years after Brahmagupta and Aryabhatta, finds its way to Northern Europe. Today, it is the nearest thing humanity has to universal language. And yet almost no one outside this country knows that this is India's gift to the world. It's an extraordinary situation. It's a very strange situation. The Buddha is a historical character, mid-5th century. Born in Lumbini, now in Nepal, enlightened in Bodh Gaya, first sermon in Sarnath outside Varanasi. And yet, bizarrely, there's no trace, really archaeologically, clearly, of anything, any clear epigraphy for 200 years after Buddha. And the likes only really go on with Ashoka. 250 BC, from complete silence, we suddenly have a world where Ashoka's words, whether you want to believe them as historically accurate, certainly as first-person narratives put out by this one ruler, pour out over the pillars, over the rock shelters of India, all the way from Kandahar to the Deccan and beyond, because he sends out his Dharma ministers as far as Cyrene, which is modern Libya, and a completely different end of the universe at this period, thanks to the fact that the Mauryans are in touch with and possibly even intermarried with the post-Alexander Macedonian Demontes out in Anatolia, Greece, and in Egypt. It's in 150 BC before you begin to get things like this. This is the extraordinary rock-cut monastery of Bajja, reproducing the entire lost bamboo and wooden architecture of ancient India, spreading to Sri Lanka, where Mahinda, the son of Ashoka, converts the king of Anuradhapura, Anuradhapura being probably the second biggest metropolis in South Asia after Pataliputra. And only last year, Mahinda's stupa is found in Rajagala jungles of central Sri Lanka on a hilltop with a southern Brahmi inscription with his name. And this is the miracle that takes place. This should be in every textbook. This extraordinary moment when, over a period of 500 or 600 years, but a lot of it within about 200 years, Buddhism spreads in every direction, totally transforming everything in Asia. Asia will never be the same again. And that Indosphere, that world affected by the diffusion of Indian thought, is still enlarging. Only 2 years ago, this extraordinary discovery, head of the Buddha, sculpted in what looks like a Gandharan style, of the sort you'd expect to find in modern Pakistan or Afghanistan, but carved in Proconnessian marble from the Marmara Sea, with tortellini curls, as the archaeologists describe it, drilled in a workshop in Alexandria, judging by the drilling technique, and with Roman or Palmyrean sun deity syncretism signaled by the rays coming out from behind his head. This opens up a whole new world because it shows and it proves that Indian Buddhist sea captains were landing and were able to commission sculptures from sculptors in Alexandria who were familiar enough with this idiom to be able to produce not some slapdash stab at a sort of cartoon Buddha, but this brilliant masterpiece. Also in the same find, 3 more slapdash early Hindu deities, Vaishnav figures, who will become Krishna and his world in generations to come in the same place. And so we have this world uncovering now by Stephen Sidebottom's excavations of Berenike, where we are seeing the births, the food, the ships, the trading patterns of Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, and Jain sea captains sailing from Muziris in Kerala, from Barigaza in Gujarat, and from Barbaricum, which is near Karachi today and the mouth of the Indus, to the Roman world, the connecting the two. And raked in a whole lot of questions. We're all familiar with the claims that St. Thomas traveled to Kerala, but is it possible, if this is true, that Christian monasticism, which is born in St. Anthony's Monastery on the shores of the Red Sea in 200 AD, at a time when Buddhist monasticism was already 450 years old, is it possible that those two are connected? We don't have the evidence. We don't have the smoking gun, but these are questions we can now start asking. And by 100 AD, this is the picture. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea is this extraordinary document, the Lonely Planet, the rough guide of the 1st century, showing an intense familiarity with every single port on the West India. So, this is Mussel Harbour, Mythons. This is where Strabo, a Greek geographer under Roman rule, living in Alexandria, takes the Greek governor for a tour of Egypt, and there they see 250 vessels waiting to sail to India. Yes. Berenike, where that Buddha was found, a larger port, and still under excavation, producing every year. This year they found somebody's pet monkey. So, I mean, you get this sort of intimate view of these sailors. And on the way, we have the island of Socotra, where they've now found 2,000 pieces of Indian graffiti. The sailors stopping for water on the island of Socotra and scribbling their names, largely Gujarati, on the wall of this cave in Socotra. This is something we knew nothing about 10 years ago, but now suddenly we have evidence of who maybe these sailors were. Whoever the owners of the ships, we seem to have Indian sailors stopping en route. And the Roman sailors are not only familiar with the West Coast, they know all the details. So, for example, they know that in Barbaricum, you can sell Roman singing boards, Barigaza, to the king of Gujarat. Details like that, which indicate a profound familiarity. But most important on this map, Tibet, which we all ignore, sits up there, now freezing over. Cold winds blowing in. It'll thaw in March and April, and warm winds will blow out. And that is one of the great gifts of this country. Because where I come from, winds just blow around Scotland in any sort of random pattern. But in India, you have winds that blow fast in one direction for 6 months of the year, then blow back again for 6 months more. That means that is why Indian communities have generations settled in Gujaratis have settled in East Africa, why Chettiars have settled in Burma, because you can go and you can come back quickly and easily, which is not the case in most islands. And this document, the Muziris Papyrus, is a crucial bridge. The Muziris Papyrus, discovered probably from Oxyrhynchus, but not certain now, in Vienna, is a random shipping invoice of the sort made out in Bombay every day, probably in the city too. It gives the exact details contained in one container that left Muziris in about 120 AD. And that container contains 120 tons of ivory. I can't remember the number of amphorae. Let's say 100 amphorae for the black pepper. And cotton. Nard, something we don't normally take in. Very important perfume and export of India. Malabathrum, cinnamon, used in both perfume and cooking. So all these things are listed, and they are given a price. And beyond that, the customs tax. And what no one knew until this time is how much your ancestors were ripping off my ancestors. Because they were vastly overcharging for the ivory and the pepper and the entire container. But we did take you back. But that's a different story. As the drain of wealth has been going backwards and forwards, and it's about to change again. So this is right. So what was inside this container? So we actually have a picture. This is a Roman mosaic from Sicily, presumably commissioned by a sea captain involved in this trade, because it shows all the things that had made his money. So he's a nouveau riche merchant who's made a fortune. He builds a fancy villa, and here in the center, perhaps to show his guests, he puts up a picture of all the things he's been trading in. And at the center, we have this rather nice yatchi of a sort of the Pompeii yatchi, voluptuous then. And what's fascinating is she is wearing silk, and you can see her limbs through it. This is exactly the complaint of Pliny. Pliny is a fantastic character. Pliny would definitely be a member of the Indian Foundation if he was around today. And you board care. He's a sea captain, highly intellectual figure, but also a bit of an old grump. And he says, "What is it with all these decadent women in Rome? Read Lutyens' Delhi. So what is it with these ladies at golf links and Jawbug that wear these highly expensive, completely unnecessarily see-through garments?" He's almost sort of seething. And that's even before he gets onto this. What is this black powder that the young today are putting all over their food? What is this new fashion for pungency? He means pepper. And then we have surface animals. Hands up, anyone that's seen Gladiator 2? Oh, I'm disappointed. 2 people at the front. 3 people. Very good. Oh, I don't know. I'd take you for a Gladiator 2 film. Anyway, so the circus animals, like the rhino in Gladiator 2, this is what is being represented here. Elephant, tiger. But look at all the ivory. And this, I think, is Malabathrum, the cinnamon leaves. So these are the things that are being traded, and Muziris Papyrus gives us the figures. And they're vast. This one container, according to the scholar Raoul McCufflin, who's been studying it for half a generation, would have been enough, if it arrived intact, to buy the importer, if he successfully sold it, the prices given in the invoice, the largest estate in Rome, Egypt, or its equivalent in Tuscany, and enough spare change to join Roman set. So you could become the Elon Musk of Roman Egypt by just slaughtering the poor elephants in Kerala, loading them into this hard thing and exporting it. And we have evidence of this. Here is the ivory dug up in Pompeii. But it's there, this is trade, so things are going in 2 directions. So here we had Russell Crowe turning up in Afghanistan on the right here. Or what's the guy you film here, man? What's he called? The new not Russell Crowe in the Gladiator 2. I've been told I'm running out of time. I'm only about a quarter of the way through, so I will have to rush through it. Okay. So things going in both directions. We'll just miss out all this stuff. um, so it all heads off towards China. By the first century, Buddhism is becoming a big deal in China. Gupta sculpture has been copied in Gansu. Ajanta-style frescoes are being copied in Western China and Kizil. And at court, Buddhism is beginning to challenge Taoism and Confucianism. And the person who really makes it change forever is Xuanzang, who the older among you will have recognized as Huansang, Sunil Sao textbooks of the 1950s. And this guy is a kind of nerdy scholar who's upset about the corruption of the Buddhist Vinaya rules, but also wants to get his hands on the Yogacara texts, which are not available in China. So he comes where? He comes to Nalanda. And in Nalanda, you can see here the shape of the universities to come. A courtyard, a cloister garden, scholars' roll. Next year, Shailendra Raj Mehta will be producing an entire book on this subject of how Indian universities arguably changed the way that scholarship is studied and the form of universities, and he argues even the curriculum. I just give this 2 pages, but it's something which he will be coming next year to prove, he says, with hard evidence over 20 years. But what really interests Xuanzang is the library, 9 stories high, full of the Vedas, logic, grammar, philosophy, medicine, metaphysics, divination, mathematics, Sanskrit, astronomy, literature, and magic. You could borrow any manuscript, but you have to place it in the pigeonhole in the central courtyard at Ma. Over 20 years, Xuanzang copies out enough manuscripts to fill an entire pagoda, which was built for him by the Emperor Taizong on the left when he gets back, the Wild Goose Pagoda. But improbably, the person who is the greatest ally for Xuanzang when he gets back is not Taizong, but a 50-year-old concubine who has just entered his service, Wu Zetian. And Wu Zetian is Buddhist. She is clearly a hottie, to put it in vernacular, and she marries Gaizong, top left, the son, and then when he dies, seizes power with the aid of Nalanda trained monks, a group of scholars called the Scholars of the Northern Gate, and Buddhism briefly becomes the state religion of China under her rule. It's the high watermark of Indian influence in China ever. But it's not alone, because at exactly the same moment, similar stuff is going on in Southeast Asia. So we talked about how all this trade took place with Rome. Rome falls in the 5th century, and there's no one left to trade with. Berenike, Mysore was all abandoned. So Indian merchants, faced with an economic crisis, pivot eastwards and discover Suvarnabhumi. They've been trading with Southeast Asia for millennia, but in a small way. Suddenly, in the 5th and 6th century, exactly coinciding with the fall of Rome, massive increase in Indian trade with Southeast Asia. You begin to find in the Jatakas and the Ramayana, Sugriva says to Hanuman, kick the land in Saranadvipa, which is probably Sarawak, and gold dust would appear. So suddenly we are finding Tamil textiles of Tamil gold workers in Southeast Asia. Ships are passing like this. This is taken since the book was published. This is all from Bujang in Malaysia, one of the very first Indic settlements where you have Buddhist temples, Mukhalinga, images of Lord Shiva, yonis, all this stuff on brick foundations on the edge of trading settlements, a river estuaries from which forest products are brought from the interior and traded with it. But the most dramatic stuff is in the Mekong Delta, where we are flying tomorrow night to Vietnam. And here with Okeo in Vietnam on the east and Angkor Paret in Cambodia or the west. You have a whole network of here. Look at these amazing Khmer canals, which lead, in the case of Cambodia, to Angkor Paret, on the slopes of which lies Ashram Maharaja. Inside Ashram Maharaja is the statues of Vishnu. But interestingly, from the beginning, not as you'd expect to find beer. They're wearing a sampa in this one. Jayavarman II depicts himself as Lord Vishnu. Here we are with a discus and a conch. Not something you'd ever see in India. I might be wrong, and this audience can probably tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't know any Raja Shura does a bit like that. Raja Shura is crowned by Lord Shiva, but he isn't as Lord Shiva, as far as I know. Yeah, no, well, I may be wrong too, but I don't know for sure. I know the image of Raja Shura being crowned by Shiva. He has got a tan in Kalichula on the Buddha, but this is different. This is the king as the dog. And this is the Brahmins under the baldachin with the Abhisheka ceremony. And these guys are being welcomed. Why? Because not only, I'm sorry, sir, I know I never talk. I've been rushed to the end. Not only do they bring an alliance between the gods and the king, but they bring practical help in the form of Southern Brahmi. Kanchipuram forms as Kalava Granta scripts. It's the same. It owes Pala. And what you find, this spreads and becomes the root of every pre-Islamic script in Southeast Asia. Mon, Khmer, Thai, Pyu, all these different scripts derived from this script, designed for palmreads, not the straight line of North Indian scripts, but in the south where you palm, if you draw straight lines, it has to be curved linear. And this is the case of Sati Faith, and it's brought to the spirit. It remains today the root of a million different spirits inside of it. But what are all these Brahmins doing here? Because are they not meant to cross the Black Water? Well, they seem to move the goalposts. Here we have some of the headwaters. One of the headwaters is Mekong in Phnom Da, and the river is being carved into yonis and lingams, sacralizing the river. At the same time, you're getting a Kurukshetra in Last, as you're getting a new Ayodhya built outside Bangkok. There's a complete transformation of the language, of the landscapes. And I know my friend Nick is skeptical. Some would argue that Mekong is just Ma Ganga in the Khmer pronunciation. So this is disputed, but it's nice if it's true. So we begin to get the short temple at Mahabalipuram, familiar to you all on the left, an almost identical temple in Gadong Songo in Jao. And then by the 9th to 10th century, you've got two super states appearing in Southeast Asia: Indonesia, the Srivijaya state, Khmer state on land. And you begin to get these temples getting larger and richer than their equivalents in India. And you get the first 120 episode Ramayana sequence sculpted in Prambanat before it sculpted Pampri in the 14th century. Of course, the greatest Hindu temple, the largest Hindu temple ever built at Angkor Wat, 1120. Within the outer moat, 4 times the size of the Vatican City. Now, I know my friend here is getting very anxious, so I'm just going to gather through the last section with just 2 minutes, which is about 30. And this is where it gets really fun. So we're now going back from 1120 in Cambodia to 550 in the Gupta era. Chandragupta II on his horse, Udayagiri outside Bhopal near Sanchi, with Varaha rising out of the floodwaters with his foot on the coils of the Nagaraja, and fresh from his jib, Chandragupta II with this very sort of butt-odic, but no head, and this is a major site of Gupta astronomy, mathematics, and calculation, Jyotisa. You have water clocks, you have astrological platforms for observation of the stars. You have sundials, all the equivalent of the flashing lights, and in the NASA headquarters of the movies of we know familiar from sort of from Space Odyssey onwards. This is the Gupta equivalent of that, and it is here this world that produces Aryabhata, calculating the circumference of the Earth, the distance from the Earth to the Sun, the fact that the Earth spins on its own axis 1,000 years before Galileo. And here, as a result of this, in Siem Reap K127, the world's first dated zero. And then, 50 years later, the same in Guayot. Disappointingly, a rather mundane inscription about the number of marigolds someone has to give to the temple. But the first dated zero with the polar shape we use today, everyone in the world uses it today. And this is where it comes from. It's not a familiar map. It would be in every school textbook in every school in the world. How these numbers begin with Brahmi in the first century, how they pass through the Gwalior inscription and then go in redirection. The Sanskrit Devanagari route, the East Arabic route used in Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and the West Arabic route initially in Morocco and Spain, which by the 16th century have become our numbers, used in every laptop, every phone, every abacus, and all around the world. How does it get to the Arabs? Improbably through Disney cars. Hands up who's seen the Aladdin, the Disney Aladdin, rather more than have seen the Gladiator 2, I'm glad to say it. So this is Jafar from Aladdin. Jafar is a historical character. Jafar is the fourth generation of Barmakid viziers. He is the friend of Harun al-Rashid. His great-great-great-grandfather was a hereditary abbot of a Buddhist monastery in Afghanistan, in Balkh. And they were Sanskrit literate, and it was their ability with Indian numbers that led to their promotion after the Abbasid Revolution. And these guys take over and build Baghdad, and one of the first things they do is to send to Sind for the works of Aryabhata and Brahmagupta. These are brought to Baghdad, and they're not adequately translated until a boy from Khwarazm, right up here, comes 3 generations later to Baghdad, and that guy is, Al-Khwarizmi, the boy from Khwarazm. He writes a book called The Compendious Book of Calculation by Completion and Balancing According to Hindu Calculation. Now, that's a mouthful in English if you hear it in Arabic. But it is known everywhere by its nickname, which is Al-Jabr. Al-Jabr. While his name, Al-Khwarizmi, is the basis for our word, Al-Jabr. So this is where we get Al-Jabr and Al-Jabr. And it spreads with chess westward. So we move from Sind. Any Sindhis in the room? Your ancestors responsible for this? Yeah. They take it to Baghdad. Then from Baghdad, it passes through Egypt, through Libya, through Tunisia, Algeria, Spain. By the 10th century, you have Christian monks in the monastery of Ripoll outside Barcelona study. But amazingly, Europe remains using Latin numbers. NCCB, XB1, try doing long multiplication with that. And then in 1120, we're nearly finished. I know you're looking very anxious, but we're nearly there. In 1120, Pisa here, decides to found a trading colony in Algeria. And the notary brings his kids, including a boy who's quite good at maths. And that boy learns Arabic, learns Al-Khwarizmi's method of calculation, and that boy, luckily for us all, is Fibonacci. Fibonacci learns the system of numbers, that would be called the modus indorum. And when he gets back to Pisa, he writes the Liber Abaci, bringing it to the attention of his compatriots. This reaches the ears of Frederick II, who invites him to Castel del Monte, which is a fantastic geometrical castle. There, it is that he meets, and this is the crucial moment, and all of you got to concentrate. He meets a Scotsman at this point, without which none of this would happen. And the Scotsman is Michael Scott, who is the court astrologer, and he listens, he reads Fibonacci, realizes it's a work of genius, but it's not immediately comprehensible and it's not practical. It's too theoretical. So he said, pal, you've got to put in, you can't, it's a wee bit theoretical, he said. You've got to put in weights and measures, currency conversions, double accounting, all the practical things that merchants and bankers will need. And this is ultimately what produces the Medici Bank. And that's where the story ended until my friend Nick called me up in the summer and tells me that Piero della Francesca reads Fibonacci, writes 3 mathematical treatises, and that his treatise is taken by Fra Luca Pacioli, what is a deliberate mistake, to the United States. So we have a relay running from Aryabhatta in Pataliputra, passes to Brahmagupta in Manabu, passes to Baghdad. Vector Al-Khwarizmi translates it satisfactorily. It passes through the Arab world, where it reaches Fibonacci, takes it to Italy, and to Fibonacci, it gets the United States. And sadly, there's one more step. It reaches England and the East India Companies. Yeah, that's a different story. So over to you. Sorry.
Thank you, Fox, for turning into this episode of Spotlight series. We hope you enjoyed the enlightening conversation with the acclaimed historian and author William Dalrymple. His book, The Golden Road, offers a deep dive into Indian Sanskriti, knowledge, and history. An incredible journey that bridges the past with the present. During the conversation, William also shared his thoughts on some iconic movies like Gladiator, Space Odyssey, and Aladdin. These films, in their own way, reflect story of resilience, exploration, and culture, much like the theme of his book. For more details and to explore the topic we touch upon today, check out the link in the description below. Once again, thank you for being a part of this fascinating conversation. This is Rajan Moga signing off. Stay curious, stay inspired, and join us next time on Spotlight series, where we continue to highlight voices that make a difference. Catch you in the next episode.